Have you heard of the term trauma bond or trauma bonding? And do you know what it means? Or do you think you know what it means? A lot of people think they know what it means, but I'm actually here to tell you the real, true, official definition of trauma bond. Stay tuned. Welcome to Waking Up from Narc Abuse, a micro podcast by Alana Sanborn. This is a micro podcast. It's meant to start your thoughts flowing. It's meant to be the beginning of a conversation, a dialogue, not a monologue. Because we're talking about something that's pretty heavy, my hope is that shorter episodes that are easier to digest will help you without overwhelming you. And here is today's show. So, a lot of people use the term trauma bond incorrectly, and I bet you didn't know that. But I'm here to set the record straight that the term trauma bond doesn't mean what you think it means. So here's what people think it means. People think that a trauma bond describes the type of relationship where you meet someone and you sort of instantly have this connection because of the trauma you've both experienced. Maybe it's in a dating scenario. Maybe it is somebody you meet as a friend or through work. It doesn't matter. But you connect deeply and in sort of this intense way because you have both experienced trauma. And sometimes it is the same type of trauma and sometimes it's not. That, my friends, is actually not a trauma bond at all. The real definition of a trauma bond is something more like Stockholm Syndrome, which I'm sure you've heard of before. It is the actual bond between a victim of abuse and their abuser. I bet you didn't realize that because nobody talks about it. Nobody uses the term that way. I wonder if the term will actually just change. Colloquially, it is not understood to mean what it's supposed to mean. So the trauma bond that someone experiences with their abuser is part of the abuse cycle. The abuser is adept at keeping their victim attached to them or dependent upon them. And they do this in a number of ways, but one of which is through intermittent punishment or intermittent rewards. Now, I've talked about this a little bit in my TikTok channel. Intermittent reward systems are a really clever way to condition anyone to do something over and over and over again. We typically know about intermittent reward systems because of how we train dogs. I know, dogs are not humans, humans are not dogs, but let me tell you, humans are very easily conditioned. If you want a dog to sit, you're going to ask the dog to sit and you're going to give them a treat, right? The most effective way to get a dog to continuously sit upon command is to sometimes give them a treat and sometimes not give them a treat. You might reward them with other things like a good dog or patting them on the head. An intermittent reward system says if you keep them guessing, they'll keep trying to get that treat. So they'll keep trying to do the thing that got them the thing that they liked. And the same thing happens in relationships, any type of relationship. If you have been rewarded in some way and you really liked it, either through praise or a promotion or affection, whatever it is that you want from the person you're dealing with, you're going to keep trying to do the thing that got you the reward. And if this person withholds that reward unpredictably and without any explanation, you become beholden to them for that thing, that reward. And it happens very subtly sometimes. Well, sometimes it's actually really obvious and painful. Either way, it's extremely efficient and extremely effective. Intermittent rewards are probably one of the number one ways that abusers keep their victims connected. And it's part of the abuse cycle. So the abuse cycle tells us that an abuser will go between being incredibly cruel and mean or physically violent or both to they'll become regretful and apologetic and maybe even then turn into someone who is begging for forgiveness and is sweet and kind again and generous. And then something happens to set them off, either by the victim or somebody else, and the tension starts to build again, and then whatever the abuser typically does will happen again. In the cases that I work with where it's narcissistic abuse, it's usually typically an emotional manipulation. So the incident, it would be something like the silent treatment or an accusation or a fight that keeps you up all night, some kind of argument that never ends. This cycle of abuse tends to get people dependent and conditioned to tolerate horrible things in order to get to the thing that they first had. And when we're talking about people with narcissistic tendencies, they generally start out a relationship with something called love bombing. Love bombing might include flattery, might include spending money on a person. Often it includes like really big confessions of love that come too soon, too quickly, and really intensely. And what I've seen a lot is narcissists who claim some type of unique and unparalleled connection that can't be replicated, which might sound something like, you are the only one who blank. You and I get each other in a way no one else can. There's some kind of expression of uniqueness that can't be compared to anybody else's connection. You're the only one. I'm the only one. It's you and me. Already, the isolation has begun of the person who is about to be abused. So in the cycle of abuse for someone who's experiencing narcissistic abuse, which is emotional manipulation and abuse, the desire to get back to the good place is extreme because the good place was so good. The good place was the pinnacle of all relationships. The good place was some place that only you two understood. A connection that only you two could share. Nobody else gets it. This is the case with romantic relationships, but also parental relationships and friendships. There's this type of soulmate connection, twin flame connection, this type of connection that just is indescribable and nobody else will get it. It's just you and me. So, a trauma bond is created through this cycle of abuse. It's manufactured, it's strategized, it's designed by the abuser, whether consciously or not. Typically, abuse looks this way and ends with this result of the victim feeling this incredible bond to their abuser. You can see how it's more like Stockholm syndrome than anything else you've probably heard it defined as. And I don't know why or how this happened. I think that the term trauma bond sounds more like what people use it as, which is, oh, I met this person and we became super linked up and, we're really connected and nobody else gets the kind of things we've been through. And so we're super bonded. It makes sense that you would use the term trauma bond to describe that type of relationship. But I actually have a different term that I use. And that term is reflective trauma loop. I think a type of relationship like this that includes what people are calling a trauma bond is a maladaptive coping skill, meaning it's not exactly a positive thing to fall into this type of connection with someone. Sometimes when you meet other people and you bond over the type of trauma you've experienced, it can be extremely healthy for you. It can help you heal. It can help you recover. It can help you feel validated and less alone, all kinds of things, which is why group experiences work for healing and recovering. Fantastic. But trauma bond is typically not a positive thing people are referring to. It tends to be something where people want to avoid that type of connection because what they're describing is again, what I'm calling the reflective trauma loop with someone, wherein you share a connection based on trauma, and it becomes this endless cycle of staying in the trauma experience, reliving it, talking about it, basing your identity on it. And you don't actually do a lot of healing and recovering in this scenario. You kind of stay in the trenches of your trauma, and it becomes the thing that means the most about you. And that, my friends, is not a healthy way to deal with your trauma. So all this to say, you're probably using the term trauma bond incorrectly. Doesn't mean what you think it means. It's actually describing the bond between a victim and their abuser that gets created through the cycle of abuse. And the thing you're calling a trauma bond is what I would call a reflective trauma loop, because you become like a mirror with this other person and their trauma, and you're stuck in a loop with them that is totally centered around the trauma you've experienced and not anything else in your life, which gets pretty unhealthy after a while. So spread the word, correct people when you hear it, let them know that's not what they're trying to describe. And I hope this has helped you understand a couple of things about how a relationship works when somebody is an abuser. All right. My friends, take good care. And as always, good luck out there.